The sheriff arrived just after sunrise, his horse slowing before the cabin like it already knew the ground carried old trouble. The old cowboy stood on the porch without moving, eyes locked on the badge as if it was a memory he hated. The orphan stayed half behind the door, small fingers gripping the wood, watching every shift in the air. Dust lifted around the horse's legs, hanging in the golden light like a warning. The sheriff did not dismount at first. He just looked at the place, at the grave behind it, at the crooked fence, at the silence that felt too practiced. Then he finally stepped down, boots hitting dirt hard. He said, "You're keeping him here." The cowboy answered, "He ain't a thing to be kept." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Everything in this valley gets kept or taken." The orphan flinched at that word taken. The sheriff noticed. His voice softened slightly but stayed cold. "Boy, come out here." The cowboy stepped in front. "Don't you talk to him like that." The sheriff tilted his head. "You think you saved him?" The cowboy replied, "I know I did." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by wind through dry grass. The sheriff looked past him again, into the cabin, into the careful order inside the child's broken world. "I knew his mother," he said quietly. That sentence changed the air. The orphan froze. The cowboy didn't speak. The sheriff continued, "She used to come to me before things got bad. Before that man took over everything." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "Which man?" The sheriff answered, "His father." The word landed heavy. The orphan whispered from the doorway, "He's gone." The sheriff shook his head once. "Men like that don't leave. They echo." The cowboy stepped closer now. "You saying he's coming back?" The sheriff met his eyes. "I'm saying his family still owns half the law in this county." The orphan's breath broke. The sheriff turned slightly toward him. "They'll come for land, for names, for anything tied to blood." The cowboy spat into the dirt. "Then they can come through me." The sheriff studied him. "That's what the last man said too." The orphan finally stepped out, small voice shaking. "Did he hurt her?" No one answered right away. The sheriff looked down at his boots. "He did worse than that. He made her disappear without leaving." The cowboy's fists tightened. "Why you telling us this now?" The sheriff answered, "Because silence already buried one life. I won't let it bury another." He pointed slightly toward the boy. "That child walks with a target on his back and doesn't even know it." The orphan whispered, "I just clean." The sheriff replied, "That's what survivors do before they learn to run." The cowboy shook his head. "He ain't running." The sheriff mounted his horse again slowly, the movement heavy with reluctance. "Before he left," he said, "names like his father don't stay dead here. They get inherited." The orphan looked up sharply. The sheriff added, "And they always come to collect." Then he rode off without another word, leaving dust hanging in the morning light like unfinished judgment. The dust lingered long after he vanished, and the cowboy stayed on the porch staring at the road like it might answer back. The orphan stood beside him, silent now, the weight of what was said sinking into his small frame. He asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" The cowboy didn't look at him. "Because I was hoping it wasn't true." The boy swallowed hard. "Is my name bad?" The cowboy finally turned, voice low. "Your name ain't bad. The men tied to it are." Inside the cabin, the neat plates and folded blankets suddenly felt wrong, like order could not protect anything anymore. The cowboy walked inside and shut the door slowly. "He's right about one thing," he said. "This land remembers everything." The orphan followed, hesitating at the threshold. "Then what do I do?" The cowboy crouched to his level again, voice steady but heavy. "You stay breathing. That's step one." The boy whispered, "And step two?" The cowboy looked toward the grave outside. "We wait for them to decide if they're brave enough to come collect what they think they own." Far away, the sound of hooves faded into nothing, but the warning stayed, thick in the air, heavier than dust. Neither of them spoke for a long time after that. The house, the grave, the silence between them all felt like it had shifted into something older, something watching. Outside, wind carried distant hooves that no one dared to follow or name now yet. Inside the cabin, the old cowboy pushed the door shut slowly, like he was trying not to wake something inside the walls. The orphan stood near the table, staring at the perfectly arranged plates, the folded blanket, the broom leaning straight against the wall. Nothing was out of place, and that was the problem. The cowboy looked around the room and shook his head. "This ain't normal," he said quietly. The boy didn't answer. He just kept his eyes on the second plate. The cowboy stepped closer, boots creaking on the wood. "Who taught you this?" he asked. The boy finally spoke, voice flat. "Mama." The cowboy paused. "She teach you to clean like this?" The boy nodded once. "She said if things stay clean, nothing bad comes." The cowboy looked at the table again. 2 plates. 1 chair pulled out. The air in the room felt tight, like it was holding its breath. "Where is she now?" he asked. The boy didn't move. "She's just tired." The cowboy frowned. "Tired don't keep a person gone." The boy's hands tightened around his shirt. "She said she would come back when it's safe." The cowboy lowered his voice. "And it's been how long?" The boy whispered, "Too many mornings." The cowboy walked slowly to the window, looking out toward the small grave behind the cabin without pointing at it. "You been living alone since then?" he asked. The boy nodded. "I keep it right. So she can find it." The cowboy turned back, face hardening with something between anger and sadness. "Boy, she ain't coming back to a clean floor." The boy flinched like he'd been struck. "Don't say that." The cowboy stepped closer, careful now, like approaching something fragile. "I'm not lying to you." The boy shook his head fast. "You don't know her." The cowboy's voice dropped. "No. But I know dead when I see it." The room went silent except for the faint wind slipping through cracks in the wood. The boy's eyes stayed locked on the second plate like it could still be filled if he waited long enough. The cowboy looked at him for a long moment, then at the obsessive order around the room. "This ain't cleaning," he said. "This is holding on." The boy finally looked up. "If I stop, she'll forget me." The cowboy's expression tightened. "No. You're the one forgetting to live." A long pause stretched between them. The boy's breathing turned shallow, like the air itself was too heavy. He took a step toward the broom without thinking. The cowboy moved faster and picked it up first, holding it behind him. "Enough," he said firmly. The boy's face changed instantly, panic rising. "No. Put it back." The cowboy shook his head. "Not till you listen." The boy's voice cracked. "It has to stay right." The cowboy stepped closer until they were almost eye level. "Look at me." The boy didn't. "Look at me," the cowboy repeated, louder now. Slowly, the boy's eyes lifted. The cowboy spoke low. "She didn't leave because of dirt. She left because something in this world took her." The boy's lips trembled. "No." The cowboy nodded once. "Yes." The boy's shoulders shook, but he still didn't cry. It was like he didn't know how. The cowboy glanced around the room again, seeing not cleanliness but fear arranged into patterns. "You've been fighting ghosts with a broom," he said. The boy whispered, "It keeps her close." The cowboy's voice softened. "It keeps you stuck." The boy backed up until his legs hit the bed. He sat down slowly, still staring at the broom in the cowboy's hand like it was the only thing holding the world together. The cowboy placed it against the wall, not breaking it, just removing it from the boy's grip. The silence after that felt heavier than before. The boy's eyes stayed fixed on the empty space where the broom had been. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. The cowboy exhaled. "Now you learn the difference between memory and prison." The boy didn't understand, but he didn't argue either. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin like something waiting its turn. The second plate on the table caught the morning light, still untouched, still wrong, still there. And for the first time, the boy looked at it without moving to fix it. The morning light hit the cabin slowly, like it didn't want to wake anything inside it. The orphan stood near the back door, staring at the small grave behind the cabin. He had not moved for a long time. His hands were empty now. No broom. No cloth. No water bucket. Just stillness. The old cowboy watched him from the porch, noticing something worse than panic. The boy was quiet in a way that felt broken. "You ain't cleaned anything today," the cowboy said. The boy didn't answer. The cowboy stepped off the porch slowly. "Hey! I'm talking to you." The boy finally spoke, voice flat. "I heard him." "Who?" the cowboy asked. "The sheriff," the boy said. When he said her name, the cowboy stopped walking. The boy turned slightly but didn't look at him fully. He said it like he knew her. The cowboy replied quietly, he did know her. That answer landed heavy. The boy blinked like he didn't expect truth. He whispered, "Was she scared?" The cowboy hesitated. "Yeah." The boy swallowed hard. "Of me?" The cowboy shook his head fast. "No. Never you." A silence stretched between them. Wind moved through dry grass behind the cabin, brushing the grave like it was listening. The boy walked forward slowly, stopping at the grave again. He didn't kneel this time. Just stood there like he was afraid the ground might speak back. "I don't remember her face right anymore," he said. The cowboy stayed behind him. "That happens. But I remember her voice," the boy continued. "She used to tell me keep things straight. Keep everything clean." The cowboy looked down at the grave. "That wasn't about dirt." The boy turned slightly. "Then what was it about?" The cowboy didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "It was about fear." The boy looked confused. "Fear of what?" The cowboy replied, "Of the man who hurt her." The boy froze. For the first time, his voice broke. "My father?" The cowboy didn't deny it. That silence was the answer. The boy stepped back like the ground had shifted under him. "No, he's gone." The cowboy said, "Men like that don't leave clean. They leave pieces behind." The boy shook his head. "She said if I keep things right, nothing bad will come." The cowboy looked at him harder now. "And did it stop bad things?" The boy didn't answer. The cowboy stepped closer. "Look at me." The boy did not want to. "Look at me," the cowboy repeated, firmer. The boy finally looked up. The cowboy said, "Your mother did everything she could. But order doesn't stop violence. It only helps you survive it for a while." The boy's eyes filled but he refused to cry. "Then why did she leave me?" The cowboy softened slightly. "She didn't leave you. She was taken out of what she couldn't control." The boy whispered, "So it's just over?" The cowboy shook his head. "For her, yes." The boy clenched his fists. "Then why am I still here?" The cowboy answered without hesitation, "Because you got out." The boy's breathing turned uneven. "I don't feel like I got out." The cowboy nodded. "That's because you're still living like you didn't." The boy turned away and walked back toward the cabin slowly. Each step felt uncertain now. No cleaning. No ritual. Just walking. The cowboy followed but kept distance. Inside, the cabin felt too quiet. The second plate still sat on the table. The boy stopped at it. His hand lifted slightly without thinking. Then froze. His voice came out barely above air. "If I move it, she won't find it." The cowboy stepped inside behind him. "She ain't coming to find anything." The boy shook his head fast. "Don't say that." The cowboy said softer, "It's true." The boy's hand trembled in the air over the plate. He couldn't move it. Couldn't leave it. Couldn't fix it. His whole body shook like something inside him was breaking. I don't know how to stop, he whispered. The cowboy stepped closer slowly. Then don't stop all at once. The boy looked at him. What do I do instead? The cowboy pointed at the room. Start by leaving one thing wrong. The boy frowned. That doesn't make sense. The cowboy said, neither does surviving what you lived through. But here you are. The boy slowly lowered his hand away from the plate. It was the first time he didn't fix something that felt broken. Outside, the wind moved again. But inside the cabin, nothing answered it. For the first time, the boy did not rush to clean the silence. The sheriff arrived just after sunrise, and the cabin felt different the moment his horse stepped into view. The sound of hooves on dry ground was slower this time, heavier, like he wasn't just passing through but measuring what he might take. The old cowboy stepped onto the porch without rushing, placing himself between the door and the yard. The orphan stood just behind him, half hidden, watching the sheriff like he was something that could change the shape of the morning. The sheriff didn't speak at first. He just looked. At the cabin. At the grave behind it. At the boy. Then at the cowboy. His face stayed calm, but his eyes carried pressure. Finally he said, "You're keeping him here like he belongs to you." The cowboy answered without hesitation. "He don't belong to anybody." The sheriff slowly dismounted. "Everything in this county belongs to somebody. Even the broken things." The boy flinched at the word broken but said nothing. The sheriff stepped closer. "Boy, come here." The cowboy moved instantly. "No." The sheriff didn't react fast. Just looked at him. "You always this protective, or is this new?" The cowboy replied, "Depends who's asking." The air tightened. Dust moved between them like it didn't know where to land. The sheriff's eyes shifted to the boy again. "I knew your mother." The boy froze completely. The cowboy turned slightly. "You never said that before." The sheriff nodded once. "Didn't need to. Not until now." The boy's voice came out small. "Was she scared?" The sheriff didn't answer right away. Then he said, "She was careful." The boy whispered, "That's not the same thing." The sheriff looked away for a moment, like remembering something he didn't like carrying. "No. It's not." The cowboy stepped down from the porch now, standing closer to the sheriff. "Why are you really here?" The sheriff met his eyes. "Because silence doesn't stay buried in this county. It grows teeth." The boy backed up slightly into the doorway. The sheriff continued, "Her name didn't die with her. It got inherited." The cowboy said sharply, "By who?" The sheriff looked at the boy. That was the answer. A long silence followed. Even the wind seemed to slow. The boy shook his head. "I didn't do anything." The sheriff's voice softened slightly. "No. But your name did." The cowboy stepped forward. "Don't talk to him like that." The sheriff didn't raise his voice. "I'm not blaming him. I'm warning you." The boy's breathing turned uneven. "Warning about what?" The sheriff looked past them toward the road. "About what comes looking when powerful men feel something left behind." The cowboy asked, "You mean his father?" The sheriff didn't deny it. The boy whispered, "He's gone." The sheriff replied, "Men like that don't go. They circulate." The boy's hands started shaking. The cowboy noticed immediately and moved closer. "Hey! Look at me." The boy did not. "Look at me," the cowboy repeated. Slowly, the boy's eyes lifted. The cowboy said, "You're here. Not there. You hear me?" The boy nodded, but it wasn't real agreement. It was survival. The sheriff spoke again, quieter now. "If they come, they won't come asking questions. The cowboy replied, "Then they won't leave asking anything either." The sheriff studied him. "You willing to die over him?" The cowboy answered without pause. "No. I'm willing to live with what happens if I don't stand here." That answer changed the air again. The boy looked between them, confused and afraid. "What's happening?" No one answered immediately. The sheriff finally said, "Something you were never meant to carry alone." The boy stepped back into the doorway, gripping the wood frame tightly. "I just clean things. That's all I do." The sheriff's voice softened slightly. "That's what trauma teaches first." The cowboy snapped his head toward him. "Don't label him." The sheriff didn't react. "I'm not labeling. I'm recognizing." The boy whispered, "I want it to stop." The cowboy turned fully toward him. "Then it stops here. With me. Not with your broom." The boy shook his head like he didn't understand how stopping could be real. The sheriff mounted his horse again slowly. "Before leaving," he said, "you think order keeps you safe. But sometimes it just makes you easier to find." The boy flinched at that. The cowboy didn't move. The sheriff added, "I'll send no one. But I can't say the same for the people who remember her differently than I do." The boy's voice broke. "I don't want anyone coming." The sheriff looked down at him once. Then said, "Then learn how to live like someone worth losing." He turned his horse and rode off without another word. The dust stayed behind longer than he did. And in that silence, the boy didn't reach for anything to clean it. The sheriff came back just after sunrise, but this time he didn't ride in like a man passing through. He rode in like someone counting something invisible. The old cowboy was already on the porch, waiting without admitting he was waiting. The orphan stood just behind the doorframe, not hiding but not stepping forward either. Something had changed since yesterday. The air didn't feel like warning anymore. It felt like decision. The sheriff stopped his horse at a distance and looked at them for a long time before speaking. "You didn't run," he said. The cowboy answered, "Wasn't told to." The sheriff slowly dismounted. His movements were calmer now, but heavier. Like the weight had settled into him instead of passing through. He said, "That boy's name is going to pull attention whether you like it or not." The boy stiffened at the doorway. The cowboy stepped slightly forward. "Then let it pull it here. Not to him." The sheriff looked at the boy directly now. "Do you know what your mother tried to do before she died?" The boy didn't answer. The sheriff continued anyway. "She tried to erase the path between you and your father's world." The boy whispered, "My father's gone." The sheriff shook his head slowly. "No. Only physically." A silence hit the porch like something dropped from above. The cowboy said sharply, "You got proof of anything you're saying?" The sheriff looked at him. "Proof doesn't matter anymore. Only what people believe they own." The boy stepped out a little, voice tight. "I don't belong to anybody." The sheriff nodded slightly. "That's the first true thing you've said." That confused the boy more than comforted him. The sheriff walked a few steps closer but stopped before the porch line, as if respecting an invisible boundary. "There's a family," he said, "that still carries your bloodline like a title." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "And they want him." The sheriff didn't deny it. The boy's hands started to shake. "I didn't ask for any of this." The sheriff replied quietly, "No one does." The cowboy turned slightly toward the boy. "Look at me." The boy did. The cowboy said, "You hear me? None of this is yours to fix." The boy whispered, "Everything I touch needs fixing." The cowboy shook his head. "Not this." The sheriff watched them, something shifting behind his calm expression. "You think protecting him is enough," he said. "But protection doesn't erase history." The cowboy snapped back, "Then what does?" The sheriff answered, "Confrontation. And consequences." The boy took a step back inside again, overwhelmed. I don't want consequences. The sheriff looked at him directly. They already started before you were born. That made the boy go silent. The wind moved through the yard again, but slower this time, like even it was listening. The cowboy said, "If they come through me first." The sheriff nodded once. "That's likely." The boy looked between them. "Why are you telling me this?" The sheriff's voice softened slightly. "Because ignorance won't protect you anymore." The boy shook his head. "I just want it to stop." The cowboy stepped closer to him now, blocking the doorway again without force. "It stops when you stop carrying what ain't yours." The boy whispered, "But I don't know what's mine." The cowboy paused. "You're alive. That's yours." That simple sentence hit harder than everything else. The sheriff looked toward the grave behind the cabin. "She tried to protect you from this ground." The boy followed his gaze and stiffened. The sheriff continued, "But the ground doesn't forget." The boy's voice cracked. "Then what am I supposed to do?" The sheriff answered honestly. "Survive long enough to decide who you become without them." The cowboy added, "And not alone." That last part hung in the air longer than anything else said. The boy looked down at his hands like he expected them to still be dirty even if he stopped cleaning. For the first time, he didn't move to fix anything. The sheriff mounted his horse again slowly. "Before leaving," he said, "if they come, they won't ask for permission." The cowboy replied, "Then they won't get any." The sheriff rode away without looking back. And this time, the dust he left behind didn't feel like warning. It felt like something waiting. The morning after the sheriff's warning felt quieter, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet that happens when something is still deciding whether to arrive. The orphan stood inside the cabin doorway, looking at the table. The second plate was still there. The cowboy was watching him from the corner, arms folded, saying nothing at first because he knew words were no longer the first thing the boy needed. The boy finally spoke. "If I move it, she'll be gone completely." The cowboy shook his head slowly. "She's already gone." The boy's face tightened. "Don't say that." The cowboy stepped closer. "It don't change because you don't say it." A long silence filled the room. The boy's eyes stayed locked on the plate like it was a living thing. His fingers twitched at his side, wanting to fix it, wanting to clean something, anything. The cowboy noticed and said, "Don't touch it." The boy whispered, "It feels wrong." The cowboy replied, "So does letting go. First time always does." The boy finally sat down on the edge of the bed, breathing uneven. "She used to sit there," he said softly, pointing at the empty chair. The cowboy didn't deny it. "Maybe." The boy looked up sharply. "Maybe?" The cowboy answered carefully. "Memory gets tricky when you're alone too long." That made the boy lower his gaze again. Outside, wind brushed against the cabin walls like slow footsteps. The cowboy moved to the table and gently slid the second plate away from the center, not throwing it, not breaking it, just changing its place slightly. The boy stood up immediately. "No. Put it back." The cowboy didn't move it back. "Look at it," he said. The boy hesitated. The cowboy repeated, "Look at it." Slowly, the boy stared at the plate again. The cowboy said, "What changed?" The boy didn't answer at first. His breathing slowed slightly. "It's not where it was." The cowboy nodded. "And?" The boy frowned. "It still exists." The cowboy said, "Exactly." That hit something deep inside the boy, but he didn't understand it yet. The boy stepped forward slowly, like he was approaching something dangerous. His hand lifted, hovering over the plate again. The instinct to correct it was still there, shaking inside him. The cowboy watched closely. "You don't have to fix it," he said. The boy whispered, "But if I don't?" The cowboy interrupted, firm but calm. "Nothing happens." The boy froze at that. "Say it," the cowboy added. The boy shook his head. I can't. The cowboy stepped closer. Say it. The boy's voice broke. Nothing happens. Silence followed immediately after. Nothing changed. The boy blinked slowly, confused by the absence of consequence. He looked at the cowboy. Nothing happened. The cowboy nodded once. That's right. The boy's hands trembled less than before, but the fear was still there, just quieter now. He slowly sat back down, staring at his hands instead of the table. I thought it would get worse, he whispered. The cowboy replied, that's what fear teaches you. Not truth. A long pause stretched between them. Then the boy asked quietly, what do I do now? The cowboy looked at him for a long moment before answering. You start by leaving one thing wrong, he said. The boy frowned slightly. Wrong? The cowboy nodded. Just one. And you don't fix it. The boy looked around the cabin like he was searching for something he could survive not fixing. His eyes landed on a small crooked cloth on the shelf. He stood slowly. The cowboy didn't stop him this time. He just watched. The boy reached out, touched the cloth, then stopped. His hand shook. He pulled it back. And for the first time, he didn't correct it. The room didn't punish him. Nothing collapsed. No sound changed. The boy stood still, breathing uneven, as if waiting for impact that never came. The cowboy spoke softly. That's how it starts. The boy whispered, it's still here. The cowboy nodded. Yeah. The boy sat down again, but this time not because he was forced into ritual. Just because he was tired. Outside, the wind moved across the grave behind the cabin, but it didn't feel like it was watching anymore. It just passed through. And for the first time, the cabin stayed imperfect and survived it. The cabin felt different in the days after the boy stopped fixing everything. Not peaceful. Not safe. Just unstable in a new way. Like something had been removed and the space it left behind was still learning how to exist. The orphan stood in the corner of the room, staring at the slightly crooked cloth on the shelf. It had not been corrected. It had stayed wrong for hours. That fact alone made his breathing uneven. The old cowboy noticed everything. You've been staring at that same thing for an hour, he said. The boy didn't answer. The cowboy stepped closer. Say what you're thinking. The boy whispered, it should be straight. The cowboy nodded. And? The boy hesitated. And it's not. The cowboy waited. The boy's hands curled slightly at his sides. And nothing happened. The cowboy nodded again. That's right. The boy shook his head like he still didn't trust it. It feels like something is waiting. The cowboy replied, that's your mind. Not the room. The boy looked down at the floor. My mind is louder than everything. The cowboy said quietly, not forever. A silence followed. Outside, wind moved across the dry land, brushing against the cabin walls like slow footsteps that didn't belong to anyone. Then something changed. A distant sound. Not wind. Not animals. Hooves. The cowboy heard it first. His posture shifted immediately. The boy noticed that shift and froze. What is that? The cowboy didn't answer right away. He walked to the door slowly, opening it just enough to look out. Far down the road, dust was rising. Too steady to be random. Too aligned to be cattle. The cowboy closed the door again gently. Stay inside, he said. The boy's voice broke slightly. Who is it? The cowboy didn't look at him when he answered. People who don't knock. The boy stepped back instinctively. Is it him? The cowboy paused. Then said, could be worse if it is. That made the boy's stomach drop. The boy whispered, I didn't do anything. The cowboy turned slightly. I know. The boy shook his head fast. Then why are they coming? The cowboy's voice hardened. Because people like your father don't leave clean endings. They leave debts other people think they own. The boy stepped closer, panic rising again. I stopped cleaning. I did what you said. The cowboy looked at him sharply. This ain't about dirt anymore. A heavy silence followed. The hoofbeats grew louder. The boy whispered, I don't want them here. The cowboy stepped forward and placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. Firm. Grounding. Look at me, he said. The boy did, barely holding himself together. The cowboy said, You stay behind me. You don't speak unless I tell you. You hear me? The boy nodded quickly. The cowboy added, And you don't fix nothing. The boy blinked. Even if it's wrong? The cowboy answered, Especially if it's wrong. A sharp knock finally hit the door. Not polite. Not unsure. Just arrival. The boy flinched hard. The cowboy didn't move yet. Another knock. Then a voice outside. Open it. The cowboy's hand slowly moved to the door latch. He looked back once at the boy. Stay, he repeated. The boy whispered, Don't leave me. The cowboy replied, Ain't leaving. Just stepping forward. He opened the door. Outside stood 3 riders. Dust covered. Silent. Watching. The middle one leaned slightly forward. Where is the boy? The cowboy didn't answer immediately. Behind him, the orphan stood frozen in the dim light of the cabin, listening to a question that felt like it had been asked before, in another life, in another version of the same land. The cowboy finally said, calm but dangerous. You're looking at the wrong thing. The air tightened instantly. And for the first time since the boy stopped cleaning, the world didn't feel like it was waiting anymore. It felt like it had arrived. The riders stayed outside the cabin without moving for a long moment after the cowboy opened the door. Dust hung between them like a second layer of silence. The orphan stood just behind the cowboy inside the doorway, barely visible, but completely still. He could feel that the air had changed again. Not like fear from the sheriff. This was colder. More focused. The man in the middle finally spoke. We asked a question. The cowboy didn't step back. And I answered. One of the riders shifted in his saddle. That ain't an answer. The cowboy replied, It's the only one you're getting. A pause followed. The orphan's breath caught quietly behind him. The man in the middle tilted his head slightly. We're not here for you. The cowboy answered immediately. Everybody here is for me. That made one of the riders smirk slightly, but there was no humor in it. The man in the middle looked past the cowboy now, into the dim cabin. Boy. Step forward. The orphan froze completely. The cowboy didn't move. He ain't stepping anywhere. The rider's voice hardened. You don't get to decide that. The cowboy replied, Watch me. The air tightened instantly again. Inside the cabin, the orphan whispered, Don't. The cowboy heard him but didn't turn. Stay behind me. The boy repeated, weaker this time, Please don't. The cowboy finally spoke softer, without looking back. This ain't about what you want right now. The man on horseback narrowed his eyes. He belongs to a line that owes things. The cowboy's jaw tightened. He don't owe nobody nothing. The rider leaned forward slightly. Blood does. That word hit the porch like a weight. The orphan stepped forward half a step before stopping himself. The cowboy noticed immediately and shifted just enough to block him again without touching him. Don't, the cowboy said quietly. The boy whispered, They're talking about me like I'm not here. The cowboy replied, That's how they do it. The man in the middle finally dismounted slowly. Boots hit dirt. The sound felt final. He walked toward the porch, stopping just at the edge. You took him in, he said. The cowboy answered, He was already here. "That ain't how it works," the man replied. The cowboy's voice stayed steady. "It is now." A long pause. Then the man said, "We don't need trouble." The cowboy let out a short, cold breath. "Then you should have stayed home." The orphan's hands started shaking behind him again. Not from cleaning instinct this time. From something older. Something buried deeper than habit. The man's eyes shifted again toward the boy. "He's not safe with you." The cowboy replied instantly, "He's not safe with you either." That landed hard. Silence followed. The wind moved across the yard, brushing dust against the porch steps. The orphan finally spoke, voice small but clear. "I didn't do anything." All eyes turned slightly toward him. He swallowed hard and repeated, louder now, "I didn't do anything." The man in the middle studied him carefully, like measuring something invisible. The cowboy didn't interrupt this time. He just stayed steady, ready. The man finally said, "That's not what matters." The orphan frowned, confused and scared. "Then what does?" The man answered simply, "What your name pulls behind it." That made the boy step back again. The cowboy's voice dropped. "You're done talking to him." The man ignored that and kept looking at the boy. "Your father left debts in more places than money." The boy shook his head fast. "I don't know him." The man replied, "That doesn't stop him from knowing you." A tense silence followed. Then the cowboy stepped forward slightly. "You got what you came for. Now turn around." The man looked at him again. "Not yet." The air changed again, sharper this time. One of the riders behind him shifted in the saddle. The orphan whispered, "I don't want him." The cowboy finally turned his head slightly toward the boy. "Nobody's handing you over." The man in the middle stared at both of them. Then said quietly, "We'll be back." The cowboy didn't blink. "So will I." A long pause. Then the man stepped back. The riders turned. Dust rose as hooves moved again, slower this time, not retreating fully, just withdrawing. The orphan stayed frozen until the sound faded into the distance. Only when they were gone did his body loosen slightly, like something inside him had been holding its breath too long. He whispered, "They know my name." The cowboy finally turned to him fully. "Yeah." The boy asked, "What do I do with that?" The cowboy answered honestly. "You survive it long enough to decide it don't own you." The boy looked down at his hands again. But this time, he didn't reach for anything to fix. Outside, the dust settled slowly over the yard, but it didn't feel like peace. It felt like the first mark of a return. The riders did not come back that night, but the cabin didn't settle because of it. It only learned how to listen harder. The orphan stood near the window long after sunset, staring at the empty road where the dust had finally dropped. His reflection in the glass looked older than it should have been. The old cowboy sat behind him in a wooden chair, cleaning nothing, doing nothing, just watching the boy's stillness like it might break again at any moment. The boy finally spoke. "They didn't take me." The cowboy replied without looking up, "No." The boy whispered, "They wanted to." The cowboy nodded slowly. "Yeah." A long silence followed. The boy's voice turned smaller. "So they'll come back." The cowboy finally looked at him. "Probably." The boy turned slightly, confused and scared. "Then why didn't you stop them?" The cowboy's answer came after a pause. "I did." The boy frowned. That didn't feel like stopping. The cowboy gave a short breath. Stopping don't always feel loud. The boy walked away from the window and sat on the edge of the bed. His hands rested in his lap, but they were no longer shaking. That was new. Not calm. Just tired. He looked at the floor. "If I leave things wrong, will they still come?" The cowboy answered honestly, "Yeah." The boy's eyes lifted. "Then what's the point?" The cowboy stood up slowly now. "The point ain't to stop them from coming." The boy frowned. Then what is it? The cowboy stepped closer. It's to stop them from deciding who you are when they do. That stayed in the room for a long time. Outside, wind moved across the dry land again, but softer now, like it had lost interest in rushing. The boy whispered, I don't know who I am without fixing things. The cowboy replied, you ain't the fixing. That's just what you learn to survive. The boy shook his head slightly. It's all I know. The cowboy nodded. Then we start with what you don't know. The boy looked up. Like what? The cowboy pointed at the room. Like leaving that plate alone. The boy didn't move. The second plate still sat on the table. Slightly off-center now. Not perfect. Not corrected. The boy stared at it for a long time. Then he whispered, it still feels wrong. The cowboy said, good. The boy frowned. Good? The cowboy nodded once. Means you're noticing it instead of obeying it. The boy stood slowly and walked toward the table. Each step felt heavier than it should have. He stopped just short of it. His hand lifted. The cowboy didn't interrupt. The boy's fingers hovered over the plate. The same instinct came back, sharp and immediate. Fix it. Align it. Control it. His breathing sped up. The cowboy said quietly, don't fight it. Just let it pass. The boy shook his head. It won't pass. The cowboy replied, it already is. That didn't make sense to him, but he stayed still anyway. His hand trembled. Then slowly, he lowered it. He did not touch the plate. Nothing happened. No punishment. No collapse. No consequence. The boy blinked like he was waiting for impact that never arrived. He whispered, it didn't do anything. The cowboy nodded. Yeah. The boy stepped back from the table like it had become unfamiliar. For a moment, he looked lost in his own room. Then he sat down on the floor instead of the bed. Not because he was told. Just because standing felt too complicated. The cowboy stayed near him, not fixing the silence, not filling it. A long pause passed between them. Then the boy asked quietly, if I'm not that, then what am I? The cowboy looked down at him. And for the first time, his answer wasn't about survival or danger. It takes time, he said. But you're somebody who can stay in a room without obeying it. The boy didn't respond. But he didn't move to fix anything either. Outside, the wind crossed the yard again, passing the grave behind the cabin without stopping. And this time, it didn't feel like something watching. Just something moving on. The night before they came back, the cabin felt too still. Not calm still. Controlled still. Like something outside had finally decided it was close enough. The orphan sat on the floor instead of the bed again. He didn't trust standing anymore. Standing felt like waiting for instructions. The old cowboy was near the door, not sleeping, just listening to the land like it spoke in a language he understood better than words. The boy finally broke the silence. They'll come again. The cowboy didn't deny it. Yeah. The boy swallowed. And next time? The cowboy answered slowly. Next time they won't be asking. That made the boy's chest tighten. He whispered, I did what you told me. I left it wrong. The cowboy nodded. And you're still here. The boy looked up. That's not enough. The cowboy stepped closer. It is for now. A pause. Outside, wind passed low across the ground, but there were other sounds underneath it now. Faint. Organized. Not random anymore. Hooves again. Closer than before. The boy noticed instantly and stood up too fast. They're here. The cowboy moved to him immediately. Stay behind me. The boy shook his head. No. I don't want to hide again. The cowboy stared at him. This ain't hiding. This is living through it. The boy's voice cracked. I don't know how to do that. The cowboy said quietly, then you do it while scared. A hard knock hit the door. Not once. Twice. Then silence. The cowboy didn't move immediately this time. He looked at the boy. Remember what I told you, he said. The boy nodded, barely breathing. The cowboy added, nothing they say gets to decide you. Another knock. Louder. A voice outside, different from before. You're out of time. The boy froze completely. The cowboy stepped forward and opened the door. The riders were back. More than last time. Not patient anymore. The man in the middle looked directly at the cowboy. We gave you space. The cowboy replied, didn't ask for it. The man's eyes shifted immediately to the boy behind him. There he is. The boy's heart pounded so loud it felt like it filled the room. The cowboy didn't turn around. You're not taking him. The man sighed like it was already decided. We don't need permission. The cowboy answered, then you don't need talking either. The air snapped tight instantly. One of the riders shifted forward. The boy whispered behind the cowboy, don't let them take me. The cowboy replied without looking back, ain't happening. The man in the middle stepped closer to the porch line again. You think this is protection, he said. But it's delay. The cowboy said, same thing until it isn't. The boy stepped forward slightly despite himself. Why me? All eyes shifted to him. He repeated, louder this time, why me? The man looked at him carefully. Because you're proof something didn't end clean. The boy shook his head. I didn't do anything. The man answered, that's never been the rule. Silence dropped hard. The cowboy finally turned his head slightly toward the boy. Stay behind me. The boy didn't move back this time. The cowboy noticed. Hey! Behind me. The boy's voice shook. I'm tired of behind you. That surprised even the riders. The cowboy didn't react immediately. The boy stepped forward another half step. I stopped fixing things. I stopped cleaning. I did everything you said.